Story 16. Exploring old military bunkers had always fascinated me. The idea of delving into the hidden history of places long abandoned, where shadows of the past lingered like ghosts. This particular bunker was deep in the forest, a remnant from decades ago when the military had a strong presence in the area. It was off the beaten path, overgrown with vegetation, its entrance obscured by years of neglect. But I had heard rumors about its existence, and the thought of uncovering forgotten secrets drew me in. The entrance was a massive steel door half buried in the earth. It took some effort to pry it open, the hinges groaning in protest as I pushed it inward. The air inside was stale and musty, filled with the scent of damp concrete. I clicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness, revealing a narrow corridor that stretched into the depths of the bunker. The walls were lined with faded military insignia, and old equipment was scattered along the corridor. Rusted metal crates, broken radio equipment, and piles of rotting wood. It was clear that the bunker hadn't been used in years, but the sense of history was palpable, as if the walls themselves held the echoes of past conversations. I made my way deeper into the bunker, the corridor twisting and turning, leading me to what looked like an office area. Desks were overturned, papers strewn across the floor, and the remains of old maps covered the walls. It was a scene of chaos, as if the place had been abandoned in a hurry. I sifted through the papers, most of them illegible due to water damage, but then I found something that made my heart race. A stack of classified documents, bound together with a metal clip. The documents were stamped with the word "Top Secret" in bold red letters. I carefully opened them, my hands trembling with anticipation, and began to read. The information inside was disturbing, detailing a series of experiments conducted during a period of conflict involving prisoners of war. The experiments were centered around psychological manipulation, with specific references to the nearby cemetery and unexplained anomalies in the area. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read through the documents. They described using prisoners to test various methods of inducing fear and manipulating their perceptions of reality. The experiments were harsh and inhumane, designed to break the will of the prisoners and extract information through unconventional means. The references to the cemetery suggested that some of the experiments had tragic outcomes, with bodies being buried in unmarked graves to cover up the evidence. As I flipped through the documents, I came across a section that mentioned strange occurrences in the area surrounding the bunker. There were reports of unexplained lights in the forest at night, voices that seemed to come from nowhere, and odd fluctuations in electromagnetic fields. The anomalies were dismissed as technical glitches, but the tone of the reports suggested that those writing them were uneasy about what was happening. I knew I had stumbled upon something significant, something that needed to be brought to light. I gathered the documents and made my way out of the bunker, my flashlight casting erratic beams as I hurried back down the corridor. The sense of urgency grew with each step, the knowledge that I was holding classified information that could unravel a dark chapter in military history. As I reached the entrance, I heard a noise behind me, the faint sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing through the bunker. I turned, my flashlight sweeping the corridor, but there was no one there. The footsteps grew louder, the sound bouncing off the concrete walls, and I felt a surge of fear. I knew I had to leave, to get out before whoever was making those footsteps found me. I pushed open the heavy steel door and stepped into the forest, the cool night air hitting me like a shock. The footsteps continued, but now they were in the distance, as if following me from within the bunker. I ran through the woods, the documents clutched tightly to my chest, my heart racing with adrenaline. The journey back to civilization felt like a blur, the forest closing in around me, the darkness filled with unseen threats. I knew I had to get these documents to the authorities, to expose the experiments and the anomalies, to ensure that the victims of those inhumane tests were not forgotten. But the footsteps never left me. Even as I reached the edge of the forest and saw the lights of the town ahead, I could still hear them, faint but persistent, like the echoes of a past that refused to stay buried. The documents held the key to unraveling the truth, but they also carried with them the weight of the suffering that had taken place in that hidden bunker. The town's familiar lights didn't offer the comfort I hoped for. They only highlighted the contrast between civilization and the wilderness I had just escaped. The documents in my hands felt like both a treasure and a burden, a connection to the past that had to be explored, but one that also carried dangers I couldn't yet understand. I found my way to the local police station, the fluorescent lights flickering in the windows. The officer on duty looked up as I entered, his expression shifting from casual boredom to cautious curiosity as I approached the counter with the stack of classified documents. I explained where I found them, describing the hidden bunker and the footsteps that had chased me out. The officer's eyes narrowed as he flipped through the documents, his face paling at some of the details. He excused himself to make a call, disappearing into a back office. I waited in the lobby, the hum of overhead lights blending with the distant murmur of voices from the adjoining rooms. The sense of unease I had felt in the forest lingered, like a shadow that refused to dissipate. The officer returned with a stern-looking detective, who introduced himself and led me to a quieter room to discuss the documents. His questions were pointed, and he seemed particularly interested in the section that referenced the cemetery and the unexplained anomalies. I asked what he knew about the bunker, but his responses were evasive, as if he was unsure how much to reveal. "We'll need to investigate this further," the detective said, setting the documents aside. "But for your safety, I suggest you stay out of the forest. If what you found is accurate, it could be dangerous to go back." I nodded, but I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that there was more to the story, something the detective wasn't telling me. I left the station, my steps hesitant as I walked back through the town. The streets were quiet, but every shadow seemed to hide something. Every passing car seemed as slow as it went by. Over the next few days, I noticed changes in the town. The local news reported a sudden surge in police activity around the forest, but no details were given. The cemetery, once a peaceful place where families visited loved ones, was closed to the public without explanation. Rumors circulated about strange lights in the sky at night and whispers of government involvement. The town, once a quiet retreat, felt like it was on the edge of something big, something unsettling. I knew I couldn't let it go. The documents, the footsteps in the bunker, the unexplained anomalies, they were all connected to a darker truth, one that I had to uncover. I started researching the history of the town, looking into its ties to the military and any records of secret experiments. The deeper I dug, the more I realized that this wasn't just a local issue. It had implications that reached far beyond the town's borders. I revisited the bunker during the day, this time with a friend who was a freelance journalist. We wanted to document what we found, to ensure that the truth couldn't be buried again. The bunker was quiet, the entrance partially sealed off by police tape. We managed to get inside, finding the corridor as dark and eerie as before. But this time the hidden room was empty, the stacks of classified documents gone, as if someone had cleaned it out. We searched the bunker, finding signs of recent activity, footprints in the dust, discarded items, and the faint smell of smoke. It was clear that someone had been there since my last visit, possibly trying to cover their tracks. But what disturbed me most was the sound of footsteps, faint and distant, echoing through the corridors. The footsteps grew louder as we explored, but no one appeared. It was as if the bunker itself was coming to life, the echoes bouncing off the walls, following us as we moved. My friend and I decided to leave, knowing that we were out of our depth. The truth we were seeking was buried deep, and we would need more help to bring it to light. As we left the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The footsteps had stopped, but the sense of unease remained, like a dark cloud hanging over us. The documents, the hidden experiments, the references to the cemetery, it was all part of a larger puzzle, one that I was determined to solve. But I knew it wouldn't be easy, and that the dangers were real. I made my way back to town, my friend by my side, both of us determined to uncover the truth. The forest, the bunker, the cemetery, they all held secrets, and I knew we would need to be careful. The darkness had its own rules, and if we weren't careful, we might find ourselves on the wrong side of them. Story 17. House hunting in a small town can be a mixed bag. Some places feel warm and welcoming, while others seem to carry the weight of old secrets. This particular house, a charming Victorian with ivy climbing up its stone walls, had caught my eye immediately. It was nestled on a quiet street, the kind where kids play in the front yard and neighbors wave as they pass by. And the price was unbelievably low, which should have been my first red flag. The owner, an older man with a polite smile and a thick accent, seemed eager to sell. He greeted me at the door with a firm handshake and a slightly forced cheerfulness. As he led me through the house, pointing out its features, I noticed his hands trembling slightly and a faint sheen of sweat on his forehead. It was as if he couldn't wait to be rid of the place. The house itself was beautiful, with hardwood floors and ornate moldings that spoke to a bygone era. The rooms were spacious, and the light streamed through the tall windows in a way that made everything feel warm and inviting. But there was an underlying sense of neglect, like the house had been empty for a while and the air was heavy with dust and faint echoes. As we finished the tour, I asked the owner why the price was so low. He hesitated, his eyes darting to the cellar door at the end of the hallway. Then he handed me a key, a large brass one with intricate designs, and said, "Take a look in the cellar." The words sent a chill down my spine. The cellar was where you stored old boxes and forgotten memories, but the way he said it made it sound like something else entirely. I took the key and walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. The cellar door creaked as I opened it, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into darkness. I flicked on my flashlight and made my way down the stairs, the air growing colder with each step. The cellar was vast, stretching out beneath the entire house, its walls lined with stone and old brick. I could see old wine racks and stacks of crates, but what caught my attention was a large wooden box in the center of the room. It was partially open, the lid tilted at an angle, as if it had been hastily closed. I approached the box, my heart racing, and lifted the lid. Inside, I found old newspapers and photographs, all of them yellowed with age. The newspapers were from decades ago, their headlines faded but still legible. They spoke of a series of strange incidents in the town: disappearances, unexplained fires, and whispers of occult practices. The photographs were even more unsettling. They depicted groups of people gathered in the cellar, their faces obscured by masks and hoods. There were symbols etched into the stone walls, strange shapes that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. The more I looked, the more I felt a growing sense of dread, like I had stumbled upon something that was never meant to be found. As I sifted through the photographs, I heard a noise behind me, a faint shuffling, like something moving in the shadows. I turned, my flashlight sweeping across the cellar, but there was nothing there. The air felt thick, oppressive, as if the walls were closing in. I knew I had to leave, to get out of the cellar before whatever was lurking in the darkness found me. I climbed the staircase, each step feeling like a struggle against some unseen force. The cellar door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing through the empty hallway. I found the owner waiting at the top of the stairs, his polite smile gone, replaced by a look of grim resignation. "So, do you still want the house?" he asked, his voice low and strained. I shook my head, handing back the key, and left without saying another word. As I walked back down the street, I couldn't shake the feeling that the cellar held more secrets than I had uncovered. The photographs, the symbols, the old newspapers, they were all pieces of a dark puzzle, one that I had no intention of solving. The small town, with its charming houses and friendly neighbors, suddenly felt cold and unwelcoming. I knew that I would never return to that house, and that whatever darkness lay hidden in the cellar would remain a mystery I was content to leave behind. Story 18. Late-night trains have a unique atmosphere: the rhythmic clatter of wheels on tracks, the dimly lit compartments, and the gentle swaying as the landscape passes by in the darkness. I was on one of these trains, a long-haul journey across the country, the kind where you settle into a compartment and let the world outside blur into the night. It was past midnight, and most of the passengers were asleep, their silhouettes faint against the soft glow of reading lamps. I was in the observation car, enjoying the quiet and the view, when I noticed a strange smell. It was subtle at first, like something burning, but it grew stronger, becoming acrid and unpleasant. I thought it might be coming from the snack bar, perhaps something left in the oven too long. But as I walked through the train, the smell persisted, growing more intense as I approached the luggage compartment. It was a heavy, cloying scent that made my eyes water and my throat itch. I checked with the conductor, who was taking tickets a few cars back, but he shrugged it off. "Probably just a mechanical issue," he said, barely looking up from his clipboard. "We get those sometimes. If it gets worse, let me know." His nonchalance didn't sit well with me, but I decided to return to my compartment and try to sleep. I figured it was just one of those quirks of train travel, a small inconvenience that would be fixed at the next stop. But the smell lingered, filling the air with a sense of foreboding. About an hour later, the train slowed, coming to a halt at a small station in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't on the schedule, and there were no signs of a town or other passengers waiting on the platform. The sudden stop was jarring, waking those who had been asleep. People peered out of windows, confused and curious, murmuring questions among themselves. Then I saw the police lights, flashing blue and red, casting eerie patterns on the walls of the train. Officers in dark uniforms boarded the cars, their expressions stern and focused. They moved through the train, searching each compartment, asking passengers to remain seated and keep their hands visible. The atmosphere shifted from curiosity to tension, the air growing thick with unease. I heard the murmur of questions, people wondering what was happening, but the police offered no explanations. They moved with precision, their eyes scanning the passengers, checking bags and luggage racks. When they reached my compartment, the officer asked if I had noticed anything unusual. I mentioned the strange smell from the luggage compartment, and his eyes narrowed. He nodded to another officer, who left to check it out. I felt a surge of anxiety, realizing that something serious might be happening, something far beyond a simple mechanical issue. As the officers continued their search, the train's conductor tried to calm the passengers, assuring them that everything was under control, but his voice lacked conviction, and the tension in the air was palpable. People whispered among themselves, wondering if there had been an accident or if there was some kind of threat on the train. The police continued their search for what felt like an eternity, each moment stretching with uncertainty. When the officer who checked the luggage compartment returned, he was carrying a small bag, carefully sealed and handled with gloves. He whispered to his colleagues, and they quickly left the train, their footsteps heavy on the platform. The conductor announced that the train would resume its journey shortly, but the mood had changed. Passengers were uneasy, their eyes darting around, as if expecting more police to appear. I sat in my compartment, my thoughts racing with possibilities. What was in the bag? Why had the train stopped at this remote station? And why had the police left without giving any explanations? The train eventually started moving again, the clatter of the tracks filling the silence. But the journey had taken on a different tone, one of caution and uncertainty. The other passengers kept to themselves, their whispers subdued, as if they feared drawing attention. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something dangerous, something hidden within the train's compartments. The smell, the police, the mysterious bag, it all felt like the beginning of a story that I didn't want to know the ending of. I kept my eyes on the passing landscape, the darkness outside a reminder that some secrets are best left undiscovered.